Ministério do Turismo e Associação Casa Azul apresentam 18ª Flip, Festa Literária Internacional de Paraty. O projeto se beneficia da Lei Federal de Incentivo à Cultura, Vale Mais Cultura e conta com o patrocínio oficial do Itaú. Apoio da Prefeitura Municipal de Paraty, Pinheiro Neto Advogados e UOL. Realização: Associação Casa Azul, Secretaria Especial de Cultura, Ministério do Turismo, Pátria Amada Brasil, Governo Federal.
Rafael Cruxin, eu sou coordenador executivo do Instituto Brasil-Israel, que em parceria com a Flip idealizou esse encontro.
Institute that together with Flip organized this encounter. Thank you, Flip, for the partnership. Thank you as well for Etgar Keret, as well as Ricardo, Teperman, and Gregório Duvivier to be part of this table, Human in Shadow Time. And before having Ricardo that will do the mediation, I will contextualize what is Instituto Brasil-Israel. In the last decades, Manichaeist narratives in the fields of the conservative movement as well as progressive movement created ideological caricatures of Israel as a state. Zionism, Judaism have prejudice, polarizations, and way of seeing in this social imaginary, and then base the foundation of IBI to have the plurality of the Jewish community, have dialogue and the diversity of opinions. Here in Brazil, it's been more common to have association of Israel with only one image, the conservative movements like flags of Israel by extreme right movements or with the religious sectors, evangelical groups, for example. So you have this phenomenon. For that reason, is being consolidated more and more that Israel and its totality has this conservative and the new right that is getting momentum in Brazil, but we have to take into account the complexity of Israel. But you cannot see the stereotype of Israel that the Zionism in Israel is not so clear in a common sense. In order to have the discussions, EB thinks that events like that is very important in this context that comes from debates that later can have importance in the society. Besides that, due to the lack of theses, dissertations related to Israel, so IBI is finding translation of books, and you have the academic background to support us. It's very important to have this partnership with the Flip, have journalists, academic professors, and artists to have new challenges and new questions. Now we have Ricardo Teperman, that is editor to the Companhia das Letras publishers, and you have the rap and music and social histories in Brazil. Thank you very much and have a good debate. Thank you, Rafael.
Thank you.
Everyone, ladies and gentlemen, congratulations, Brazil and Israel Institute, for this performance and this cycle at FIP It's wonderful to have these fantastic guys, Etgar Keret and Gregório Duvivier. Good afternoon, Etgar.
Hi, hello.
Hi, Gregório. It's so good to be with you today. So, human in shadow time. You don't have to talk a lot to say what it means in this dark time. It's self-explanatory, but it's good to remember the origin of the expression that comes for the first time in Bertolt Brecht's poem, "The Ones That Will Be Born." I have the first sentences. It's true. I am from the shadow times, dark times, and you have no fringes in your face. It's lack of sensitivity. Maybe you are smiling. You do not know what is the bad news. So it is a good response for this time. Etika, you have here with Duvivier, you have terrible times that are coming, that you are having breakfast, you're having lunch, and you will have bad news together. In the same way, you have a wonderful book of Hannah Arendt, Men in Dark Times. Hannah Arendt, The Dark Times, is not so new was, and it's not something rare in history. And saying this wonderful writer, even in the dark times, you have to have some lights coming, and this light will come, the illumination will come. I'm paraphrasing, that is this doubtful light is from men and women in their lives will shine in all circumstances, and you come in the time that they have in earth. In this light full of doubts that Gregório Duvivier, Etgar Keret, will talk about today, and they radiate this light. Ethica will be in English, Gregório and I in Portuguese, but you have simultaneous translation, so you can choose your language with or without translations, and you have the YouTube of Flip, and you have today the other table at 4 p.m. And Adriana and I let you be together talking about love and war with Maria Laura Neves as a mediator. They will all be available in the YouTube at Flip, and more information you can have in social medias of Instituto Brasil-Israel, IB. Edgar Keret was born in Ramat Gan in Tel Aviv in 67. He is one of the most important writers, and he has books translated in 35 languages. His texts were in New Yorker, Pell's Review, and New York Times. Two of these books was published in Brazil 7 years. Good, and suddenly knocking the door. Etka, is there in Israel dichotomy between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv? You have the millennial history with all these religious background, and you have a cosmopolitan city, modern, secular, where you have the first migrants, Zionist migrants, big writer in Israel like Amos Oz and Dave Grossman were born, and they have the trajectory associated with Jerusalem. What about the importance of Tel Aviv in your life, in your perception of life, in your human and literature?
Well, first, I just want to address
Please.
the elephant in the room because we are talking about countries in times of conflict, and now we live in the time of the pandemic, and the entire world is in conflict. I think that we are experiencing maybe our first global trauma. It's like if in the past we each used to eat our traditional food, so now we have the McDonald's of traumas distributing the same traumas worldwide, and it's as if like this kind of a global synchronized swimming of people trying to avoid, the pandemic, and it makes all the political differences seem to be to feel as if they are like from a a past word, you know. This is, of course, you know, just an illusion, and they will be back with full force. But I can't talk about, you know, dangers in Jerusalem or in other parts of the world when, you know, when there are millions of people dying from coronavirus in Brazil and in other parts of the world. I think that the differences between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, they're almost too much fleshed out. You know, Jerusalem is on a mountain, secluded, you know, surrounded by walls. Tel Aviv is on a beach, open to the Mediterranean and to other countries. Jerusalem has a history of thousands of years without one decade that passed without a conflict, always at war, Christians and Muslim Jews and Muslim Jews and Christian, never at ease. While Tel Aviv basically is blessed by the lack of history. It's made on a piece of sand without having to carry all those past grudges and without this kind of a petrifying feeling of holiness that Jerusalem holds. You know, in Jerusalem, there will be thousands of any religion, any monotheistic religion on earth that they will be willing to sacrifice their life for one stone or another in a Jerusalem street. Nobody would even give you $20 for a stone in a Tel Aviv street. And this is why I like living here, you know, without some kind of burden of history, with the freedom of maybe trying to create a new narrative, an inclusive one, and not trying to solve seemingly insolvable grudges. And I think that the big difference between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem is not in the make of the city, because both in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem you can find Jewish ultra-Orthodox, Arabs, right-wing fundamentalists, left-wing intellectuals. But the big difference is that in Jerusalem they are in their little ghettos. Each of them has its own neighborhood. You know, my sister who's an ultra-Orthodox, she lives in Mea Shearim. She will not frequently visit other neighborhoods. And the same goes for our Arabic neighborhoods. While in Tel Aviv, everything is mixed together. You are in the same apartment building, and in one floor there is a rabbi, in the second one a gay couple, in the third one an Arab DJ, you know, and they're all living together. This is what I like when I walk the streets of Tel Aviv. The ability to walk next to a sushi bar, and then next to it to a synagogue, and then next to it, you know, to the corner where transvestite prostitutes work. You know, it's all there together, and there are really real interactions between those people who do not agree on a way of life, but who accept the other's humanity. And I think that in Jerusalem, this kind of coexistence is much more difficult. You know, we know it from the gay parades, that in Tel Aviv they really become like a carnival in which children of different religions take place and support this kind of a liberal celebration. And when it's celebrated in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, there are always attacks. You know, there were a girl murdered there and other people who were wounded. And it always seems that every step that a human being takes is threatening one divinity or another.
Você mencionou a pandemia logo de início.
Talked about the pandemic in the beginning of your talk. How do your daily life, I mean, everybody's daily life has been influencing your literature, as you are writing a lot about what is your experience when you are walking on the street, your meetings, talking to Gregório, he remembered, and he want to know, Etgar, how do you make literature in 2020 without going home? You cannot be outside.
Well, first of all, I long ago discovered that the best place in a city for a writer is a balcony, because, you know, as a writer you want to be both an insider and outsider, and I live on the first floor, so I spend all my life in my balcony, doesn't matter if there's a pandemic or not a pandemic. I usually prefer sitting in a place where I can see people and listen to them without them noticing me. It's my favorite position. and and I want to say that in my daily chores, I think that the biggest change is that I'm not traveling. I was lucky enough to be in Flip in past editions, and I usually travel a lot. And in the time of the pandemic, I'm home, and I stay put with my family. I was afraid that I would be bored to death, but I actually discovered that my mundane life are much more exciting than I was afraid that they won't be. and and I think that basically my daily chore is kind of waking up, sitting at a table, saying what do I want to be today, where do I want to go, what do I want to imagine. So in a sense, a lockdown is not such a big threat on a writer. I think that the thing about lockdowns that they basically break the force of inertia for most of the people in the world, because we're used to going to work, visiting an aunt, going through the motions, and then this is put to a halt. But for a writer, I think that the force of inertia doesn't play so much a part anyway, because every day that I wake up and I sit in front of a blank page, I feel as if I'm being born as a different character in a different universe, and it doesn't matter if there's a virus outside or not.
Legal. Obrigado. Bom,
Thank you.
Gregório Duvivier
Gregório Duvivier was born in Rio de Janeiro. In 1986, he's graduating languages, he is comedian, he is one of the creators of A Porta dos Fundos, where the works of a screaming actor, and A Partir de Amanhã, and chronics to be read in every places, and organizer of poema joke, poema piada by humor editor. Gregório, you were in Israel, so you read Etgar's book. So how do you compare your humor in Brazil and what Etgar says about Tel Aviv in Israel? Yeah, I'm a fan of Etgar for a long time. I had a reading of his books in theater. Yeah, a kind of a reading cycle. It was fantastic to read his books. He has a lot of humor, very open-minded eyes about life. I loved the way that he talked about pandemic. I like very much to be on the street. Rio de Janeiro is a place, is a city that you walk on the street. You have a street city. Every experience is in the sidewalk, where you talk to people, you stop and go, I am very close to go to the grocery store, to the bakery. I have 7 people, and then you see, about his kid, her kids. So in Rio de Janeiro, it's very expensive to live in Rio. It's claustrophobic. So it's good to be outside. You go to Boteco. It's like a bar, pub, and a bakery. You have very nice people that welcome you. So you have the squares. And what I was really surprised is that I don't have holidays of my life myself. For example, when I go to a bakery, I used to go, the baker thought that I like carnival in Marquês de Sapucaí parade. And he said, have you seen Tuiuti festival? And I had to know, I had to research everything before going to bakery. What about the samba schools, because I didn't want to disappoint my baker that said maybe he was the person that I'm not I'm not the person. So the person from the new stand said, oh, you are from this team of football. And I was not. So I was supposed to be out of my personality. I could have holidays of myself. And now I am face to face to myself, and I am not that so pleasant person. You know, you cannot take some holidays of yourself. So I would like to be other people, you know, when I'm outside, because people see me in a different way. And when I don't have them, I am myself every single day. I am getting tired, and I'm not so inspired because of it. I told this during pandemic, and in Brazil there is a specificity. You cannot say that you had a pandemic, an experience as a country of a quarantine, and you cannot say that you didn't have it because many people had. I did, but many people in Brazil is not living this experience. So we are so politically fragmented that there are people who do not believe that you have a pandemic. People say that there is a pandemic, but you can have to go outside to have immunity as a cattle. So it's difficult as a writer to say that you have so fragmented experiences of the reality. So I stayed at home. So every time you say you that are at home, is gonna say you are crazy. You believe it? This Chinese disease, and you say you are being elitist because you cannot stay at your home. You are obliged to work outside. So you know it was to unite the country, a pandemic with this size. You had to forget, as Keret said, the political fights in some countries were suspended. They haven't finished, but they put a pause in the political fight. You can stop and then you come. You have a pandemic to deal with. In Brazil, they were intensified. If you had a kind of a break, now you have really a hole, a big whole is a geographic whole. You have a people inside, at home, and outside on the street. So you have the political, geographical differences. People who believe the pandemic and people who do not. So it's difficult to talk if you have this schizophrenia in the country established. In a sense, what you talk about schizophrenia in Brazil, when I was in Israel, I had the impression, I always had the possibility. I think, Brazil is very schizophrenic. I thought I would never find a place like that. But when I was in Israel, I was surprised. It was possible to see a person even intensively full of contradictions. I don't know how was your experience, Gregório, in Israel, but my experience there was a kind of passion to find a place that is invaded by these contradictions. I'm curious about knowing in a political perspective how the pandemic is. But Gregório, how was your experience in Israel? I felt very much so as I am in Rio, specifically Tel Aviv. Jerusalem is very original, sui generis, but Rio de Janeiro is very Tel Aviv oriented, because of the architecture. Copacabana is different because you have a huge sidewalk, a large sidewalk, and you have the army there and violence. Here you have the police officers. So, yeah, for a person from Rio de Janeiro, the occupation of the army is something natural, unfortunately. So I thought I was at home. I felt myself at home in Israel. Of course, that I was annoyed with this occupation, military occupation, but it's not that different from the Brazilian army, what they do in the occupations that you have in the slums, in the communities, in low-income communities in Rio. There is omnipresent in everywhere. But what is really interesting that even though, like here in Rio, people get along with it and with a kind of being light about this. It's not that heavy. Yeah, it's like Rio de Janeiro, Copacabana. You have the army together with a gay celebration, and you have different cultures and a mixture of cultures. I have friends who live there that I visit. One was living with a Russian and Argentina in the same place. It's like a joke because in Brazil we have jokes like that. Argentina, Brazilian, and French went to a bar in Tel Aviv. It seems like that in the beginning of a joke. In Brazil, we say, because in Brazil we have people from all over, more or less, our everybody in the same, from the same world, different worlds. You think that Italia, Argentina, it's everything. No, in Tel Aviv you have a lot of people. You have people from Lebanese, you know, Australians, Argentinians, all together. It's like Epcot Center, but it's true. You have, it's not Disney. So this melting pot was fascinating. You too write about the paternity experiences, the experience of having children in a time like ours, in any time, I would say. It's difficult to think that the world is the best way to have children, even though now, can you imagine? How difficult, how frightening is to have this world to our kids. I remember that it has a cartoon of Argentina Kino that left us into 2020, one of the big losses you have in 2020. And my father asked her father to say which address she should address the letters for the children who haven't born it yet. And her father said, "Oh, it's impossible." So she put the letter in the trash and she wrote, "If you can choose, do not come. If you can choose." It's very nice what Mafalda said, but I would like to hear about from you about that, the experience of opportunity. You have 7 good days when you have live in the middle of a terrorist attack. I think she is around 10, right? And now,
Lev is already 15. He's a big boy. And what I want to say is that I think that the time of the pandemic, for me, it does not provide a big change, because for me, the pandemic is like in a backstage. It's like the background of the stage. It's human beings who make the play. We can make it a comedy or a tragedy, and the pandemic will still be there. I think that there is something in the time of the pandemic. It could be a time of togetherness. It could be a time of anonymity and diversity. If you speak to Trump, it's the Chinese virus. If you speak to some liberals, I would say it's a proof that we cannot survive as individuals, but just as a society. So it's like this Rorschach stain that every person can put to it whatever they want. But one thing for sure is that I think that the moment that you become a parent, you develop a sense of a future, because when you just live your life, you don't think 20 or 30 years ahead. But when you have a 15-year-old kid, you imagine him 40, you imagine him 35, you imagine him moving through time. And I can say that, that I'm worried for the world, but much more than I'm worried for the world, I am worried for my country. Because I think that if I see that the arc that my country had been taking in the 30, 25 last years, it became a country that is less liberal, more religious, more racist, less open-minded, for a solution, less open for an internal dialogue. For example, I'm being a left-winger. Once people used to disagree with me, now they can call me traitor. So you have a feeling that the place that we are going to, if I would say that, let's say in the 70s, you'd felt that Israel was almost a first world country, this close to being a first world country. Nowadays, we have all the technology and the money that first world countries have, but you can't feel sometimes as if we are this close into becoming a banana republic. We are this close into admiring leaders as if they were kings, thinking that they're above the law. And in this sense, to be honest, I don't see a huge difference between Israel and Brazil. I really feel that when I grew up, I lived in an age where leaders would basically talk about what they did and not. And nowadays, we usually talk about what leaders had tweeted or put on Facebook, but not on their action. Who they're blaming right now, who they're unhappy with. And it's as if at some stage our leaders had become some kind of reality TV show stars that are more inclined on making our life interesting than on actually assuming responsibility, trying not to incite, trying to put all the society together to actually solve problems, to rely on professionals. I really think that in COVID time, it's very clear that when you see world leaders that have no knowledge whatsoever about epidemiology or health, basically take decisions like Boris Johnson shaking hands of pandemic patients, or like other leaders saying, I will not wear a mask because it makes me look stupid. So in that case, it's really like it's almost like kind of a devolution that society had gone through. If we've reached a stage in which we were able to outsource our questions to professionals and to listen to them, now we are more in kind of a Nero and Caesar's time, where basically, the leader has the charisma and the intuition, and knowledge is really something that is totally unneeded to deal with the problems that life dishes at your country.
A sua literatura muitas vezes parte de experiências
Your
muito
literature comes from difficult conflicts and experiences and misunderstanding. And how can you see the complexity of a reality? How can you see beauty in the middle of all of this situation? I remember when you had an interview that you said that for that reason you prefer doing literature to say op-eds, like opinion stories. Do you think that the world today prefer literature or opinion articles?
Well, one thing I can tell you is that I think
Okay.
that Facebook had killed the time of the op-eds, or killed the time of the polemic, because I think that today people live inside their feeds, and basically they experience reality as some kind of a Star Wars movie in which they make their own bad guys or good guys. I saw people writing posts both as Democrats and Republicans, and they were really just as narrow-minded. It doesn't matter which side of the fence they were. It's all about kind of demonizing the other and attacking the other. So I've written op-eds for many times, but right now I really feel that when I write them, I either preach for the choir or get myself an extra death threat that I could have done better without. So I don't miss it. I don't miss it this much. But when it comes to literature, I think that there is something about literature that, because it's fiction, because you don't claim to speak about the word, the real word, but about an imaginary word, somehow people tend to listen more. They don't feel threatened. They don't think that in the end of a fiction story, you're going to ask them for $20 or to sleep over on their sofa. So they kind of relax and they can just listen. I think that people are much more compassionate toward fictional characters than that they are toward real people. And I'm talking about myself too. I can write something very, very sensitive about a homeless person, but at the same time, if I walk down the street and one of them will approach me too quickly or too aggressively, I will escape, without giving them any money. So I think that there is something about fiction that it kind of provides us with this kind of safe space in which we can watch humanity, watch human experience, reflect on our actions, criticize ourselves without feeling that we are doing it in the line of fire, without feeling that we can take a bullet for that, or suffer some kind of a loss for our sincerity and our openness. So I truly believe that that today, if you want to affect people, you can have, if anywhere, you can do it through fiction. It's more difficult to affect people's opinions than ever, but I'm saying that that the only way to engage in a dialogue about the emotions and subtleties is through fiction, because when you try to do it through nonfiction, people will start cursing you after the first paragraph.
Gregório, na sua atuação, você
So in your performance, you have a plural activity, right? You have things that are more fiction-oriented. I remember the last show with the Calderoni, Sísifo, that talks about today, of course. And sometimes you are close to reality. You have this tenor reality, like a drag news. How can you see these two registrations in this creation not attached to the real time? Or Greg, so how do you see this relationship in your literature, in your humor, whatever? I liked very much to see what Etgar said. I ask $20 at the end of the day when I write my chronics. The chronic is even worse when you ask for that. It's not a chronic. Chronic is not something that you write. You can write. It's not so easy to be achieved. Not everything that is written in the newspaper is chronic. Chronic is a status that some stories can get to this point. Some articles, every time that they have number, data, it's article, it's not chronic. When someone wants to convince you, it's not chronic anymore. So sometimes I revisit my chronic when you have something, however, how thus. So when you have a chronicle type of article format, I really agree with the Keret. It's repulsive when someone wants to convince you with a lot of arguments. So it's lazy for the person who read. It's difficult that a person who you change the mind because of a text, not because of affect or a live dialogue, but because of a written text, really. Even if you have this pretension as a writer to make people sensitive about a cause, I think it's much more efficient when it's embedded in a book and embedded in a subtle way, when the author thinks that I am an idiot and think that you are not going to realize that there is ideology inserted. Proust said that the novel writer that makes clear the theory makes an educational mistake, because you are giving the price of the book, and that's it. So the chronic writer that makes crystal clear what he means by that, his mindset, is kind of educational mistake. I do this frequently, even though, because in Brazil there is a specificity. For example, the fire is in the building. Prata did it. The building is in fire. So the chronic writers say fire only. Because you stop writing chronics, you do not to have a sonnet about the fire if the building is in fire. Yeah, to have a poem is a privilege when you don't have fire in the building. Yeah, when you say fire in the balcony is not so efficient, but when it's in fire, there is no way out. I would like to talk about paternity. I had this honor to see all these episodes of Porta dos Fundos, no exception. And there is one that I think is paternity in English. You go there in a soccer place and you say, pregnancy is not that, nothing changes. Life is the same after pregnancy. And you have this caricature like a good father that, nothing has to do with the implication of a kid that comes to our lives. I would like to hear from the experience of creating, since Marieta, your daughter, and this technique to have a situation and they have this extreme caricature of the reality, the paternity. You have a lot of chronic facts. You have a lot of subjects. It is very comprehensive activity, really radically transformative. My life is upside down. Everything that I was before, it was temporary. Sometimes I was comedian, I was a serious actor. Sometimes I was poet, or nothing to do with that. Sometimes I'm from one team, Fluminense. And I didn't know what I was before Marietta. And anyway, I do not know who I am. But the paternity, when I looked at me, I said, I am this. I am a father. I will be forever, father forever. What you are, I'm not going to transcribe, but it's about maternity, actually. But it's the same. You can forget about everything but paternity, the relationship with my daughter. I cannot transfer, I cannot delay, I cannot even glue at all. I mean, I cannot forget about the pandemic is marked because of that. Everything I write has to do with it. Yeah. Sometimes I have some envy for people who do not have kids. They are doing marathon series. They are reading Pierre Paris. They are learning a new instrument. Now the single man, he is having Toy Story. Now I am, as a father, having Toy Story, Yeah, and I was writing a chronic, but the capacity of my daughter, she is fantastic. She believes everything. She is the best input. Sometimes she sees an alligator and she believes it is an alligator. So the experience of pandemic at home is fantastic because the objectives can be anything of the world. You can see the world with her eyes, and fathers sometimes, fathers that experience the paternity. I am a believer more than I used to be. I believe in the animation of things. I am more naive, if I can tell. I can believe in thousands of possibilities that the planet offers. So when you live this paternity, it's very transformative. It is very useful for the poet, for the writer, because what you are looking at, you are looking for is this I that is not a repetition of the obvious. I think the enemy number one is the obvious, is the repetition of the language, the old languages used. Children have this fresh language. They have a new language, neologism, every single day. So for me, as a writer of chronics, it's fantastic. It's the best of all. Yeah, there is a story in Seven Good Ones. It goes to Gothenburg ferry in Sweden, and there was a newspaper that was fake news about Israel taking the organs from Palestine that was a disease, but it was a delirious to see this story of fake news in that time. It was not well known by that time. So I'd like to remember this story about false narratives that you have about Israel and Palestinians. And I'd like to hear from you, how could you have the Sweden people that Yom Kippur is the funniest holiday of the religions, is the most cool holiday of the world?
Oh, I always thought that Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, was the best holiday ever, because the fact that you disconnect from all the media and that you don't use a car and that you can take a walk on a highway, and listen to the birds, just be with your family. I think first of all, every person needs one day of atonement, one day to break away from everything, and to think about the places where he done wrong and where he could do better. But the idea is that when you promote it to Scandinavians, then automatically the fact that you fast sounds very good for a diet. The fact that that you don't use any cars, it sounds very ecological, and everything becomes super trendy. When you put it in this kind of a hippie Scandinavian context. And I want to say that as an Israeli traveling the world, I feel that my role is sometimes very complicated because in Israel I'm in opposition to Netanyahu and his prime minister. But of course, when I go to other places around the world, I'm perceived as Israeli, and I have to answer and explain some of the policies that the government that I oppose is taking. And I want to say that that in the case of Israel, really many times you have to deal with false narratives, anti-Semitic ones. But at the same time, many times you have to deal with criticism that it's basically almost impossible to fend off. You talk to Palestinian families who are separated. You talk to young grandchildren who are unable to see the grandparents before you die. You deal with all kinds of difficult issues. And when you're overseas, people come and talk to me as if I'm the foreign minister of Israel or the deputy prime minister, as if I'm able to solve the problems. And the only thing I can offer them is their empathy. I truly believe that, us Jews, believing that we're the chosen people and the people of the book, and and holding what seems to be, at least at the time, very kind of a liberal and open-minded and considerate set of rules, that together with the fact that we ourselves were suffering from racist discrimination for so many years, and suffering from the Spanish Inquisition to the Nazis in the Second World War, I really feel that it puts the Jewish people in a position where we definitely should try as hard as we can. I really, as a son of a Holocaust survivor, I never believed that the message of the Holocaust was that Jews should be strong, but that human beings should be compassionate and not technocratic, and be able to rebel against anything that they see around them that seems to jeopardize the humanistic values. And this is why I put a very high bar to the Jewish society, to the Israeli society. And many times, as with our current government, this bar is not being met by political decisions.
É muito bom ouvir você, porque como o Rafael disse no início do evento,
It's very good to hear from you, as in the beginning of our table. It comes from the audiences. The image of Israel is associated to this extreme radical right, very, very violent. Because in the demonstrations of the support of Bolsonaro, you have the flag of Israel. Never had the flag of Israel before associated to a political movement the way that it is connected to the extreme right that you have in power. It's really astonished. I am astonished to that. And you see the left
sorry, but what I want to say is that right now, with the Trump administration and worldwide, basically Israel's best friends are evangelists who basically think that the current government maybe will get them the apocalypse that they want. I've read the evangelist gospel. Gospel. It doesn't bring anything good for the Jews. It really, if those guys want us to do something, I would reconsider. But I think that today there is a coalition, let's say, between the evangelists of the world and some people in the Jewish right, religious Jewish right, that basically for the first time they mix very efficiently messianic beliefs with pragmatic politics. The idea that I think that everybody like to accept religion into the liberal democratic structure, saying it doesn't matter what you believe in, we're still all playing the same game. But right now I feel that in Israel, very much as with the evangelists in the US, you really have people that seem to be leveraging democracy more than respecting it. It's basically kind of saying, okay, let's use it if it will further our needs. But basically, our grand plan is to have the four riders of apocalypse reaching Jerusalem and Fox News covering it. This is what we want. And I really, really feel that it's not enough for us to support on allies that believe that we will bring them some kind of the end of some kind of a prophecy, and turn our back to allies that basically respect values like equality and liberal and democratic thinking.
É muito importante ouvir você também por isso.
It's important to hear from you also because of this, because sometimes the left side, the left wing is so have the stereotype that they can really put fire in the Israeli flag in the opposite side. Gregório, would you like to talk about that?
This is total bullshit. I mean, look, I think it's easier to speak about the US than to talk about Israel because everybody watches the US. So let's say when you see a guy saying, if you don't agree with me, you're a traitor, but I'm Putin's best friend and I'm actually being supported by the Russians, but you must be a communist. I mean, come on. When you look at the Israeli political games right now, every person who disagrees with Netanyahu is considered a left-winger and a traitor. Now, those people, they were chief of staff of the army, They were fighting wars for Israel, There were people that I, as a left-winger, would criticize as right-wingers. But suddenly, the moment that they don't want to have a prime minister put on trial, in a position of power, then they are traitor. They are setting fire to the flag. No, it's really, really. If you check, let's say in Israel, among Jews, who are the Jews who violently confront the Israeli army? It's usually the settlers. It's usually the settlers who can throw stone at a police car or push away an officer. It's not the left wingers, But I think that worldwide you always have this narrative of loyal people and traitors, those who want to make America great again and those who are against it. And and in this kind of coalition, I definitely find Israel with Netanyahu in the wrong side. When I see Yair Netanyahu, the son of Netanyahu, putting on his Twitter account anti-Semitic caricatures that compares Soros, some lizard monster, and I see the head of the Ku Klux Klan sharing this tweet with the son of the Prime Minister of Israel, I say, my God, something is wrong in this picture. The son of Israel's Prime Minister is not there to reinforce anti-Semitic ideas about people who try to confront an authoritative and populistic racist regime as it is in Hungary. So I think that as Jews, when I look at the values of Judaism, which are values of being polemic, of always arguing, even with God, it doesn't matter if you're Abraham or Jonah or Job, when I look at those values of reflecting, and in the bottom line, they are all being diminished to a kind of a building partnership with people like Bolsonaro, Trump, and Viktor Orban in Hungary. I say, what would have been wrong if Angela Merkel would have been our friend? What would have been wrong if New Zealand and Australia would have been in touch with us? Why do somehow we find ourselves associated very close to countries that are super religious, as Israel is turning to be, trying to impose all kind of stuff, like not allowing abortions and stuff like that. Why those people who are anti-abortions suddenly became the greatest friends of Israel? We used to have other friends before that.
E, no entanto, há muitas experiências justamente.
We have, even though progressive experiences that come to us, crystal clear. To Israel, you have many fronts in the countries. You have a progressive intelligence, like in Brazil. Sometimes you do not see a recent program, Drag News. Gregório can talk about marijuana that you mentioned, the experience of Israel. And you can say, how was this progressive movement in Israel, these amazing contemporary Israeli society? You talk about Drag News, a rabbi that said the marijuana can be kosher because there is in the Torah, you can have this dizzy time. I understand the discussion, what Etgar said, and this revolt, this uproar of Israel with this anti-Zionist, anti-Israel attitude. At the same time, is a good examination of consciousness in Israel. There is something that is not deserved. You elected, really re-elected Netanyahu before 7 bad years, to paraphrase Keret. He had the settlement, the occupation. I myself, as Brazilian, if I have the Brazilian flag being fired, putting fire in Russia or Argentina, maybe you deserve it. You know what I mean? I think it is idiot. It's stupid to do so, and it's not effective at all. Who cares to put fire in a flag? But I think there is something, is what Keret said, trying to find progressive input. But I ask myself, what is the sense of have a progressive approach in neoliberal progressive approach? Nancy, he says the old is dying, the new cannot be born. And in the 20 years is this progressive neoliberalism. Nancy has a very acid and relevant eyes about this progressive of Obama. Oh, in Brazil, in the time of the Labor Party, you thought that it was over and you are getting the credit of history. And you had marijuana being released in some countries, but you didn't have a lot of progress in the income distribution, more than the United States we had in Brazil. And you had the gay marriage, but you have a lot of deportation, right? It seems a good thing in 2000. So you say that democracy is being threatened, in ruins, but there is a neoliberalism, a progressive neoliberalism, capitalist neoliberalism that is very positive as well. I agree that you have in our legislation abortion, legality in a case, and you cannot take listen to the best society. It's not what you say, to see the the intentment of the Little Mermaid, let's say. So you have to have a positive pact. So, for example, the United States says, let's liberate the gay marriage, but you are going bombarding that country. So this is a threat. It's dangerous as well. You are right. Etgar, would you like to talk about this?
Yeah, what I think is that again, when you look at the political polarity, it's not that there are good guys and bad guys. I think that we were able to manufacture a political system in which there are hardly no good guys in the political system. You know, I think if somebody would say to me, would I prefer my son will be a mafioso or a politician, I would say, who cares? I've already lost him. You know, the feeling is really that this job that should have been the most desired and appreciated one, you know, the modern society had given up on it. We tend to kind of accept the fact that our leaders are liars and they are selfish and they are unreliable, and we just change one unreliable leader for another. I don't think that in the past 30 or 40 years, Gregorio or you were sitting in your room and saying, oh my God, this guy is the most talented person in Brazil, the most honest and sincere, and is our leader. It didn't happen and it will not happen. But I'm saying, having said that, I think that there is something about a leader that is like a commercial presenter for a product. You know, it's like Michael Jordan promoting Nike trainers. And and I think that sorry for saying it, like somebody like Bolsonaro is not a good presenter for a country I would want to live in. You know, I want to see a guy because, for example, let's say Obama was a very problematic leader. There are many things to criticize about him. Really, it's really like, I mean, this guy, he didn't do very well in the world affair business. He did many mistakes with China. He did mistakes with Egypt. But at the bottom line, when you look at this guy and you'd say, would I want to live in a world where an Afro-American guy who basically doesn't care, doesn't incite against other, tries to all the time to reach some kind of totality. I don't care if he lies. He's the guy in the commercial. And in this commercial, what he's selling, I want to buy. And I'm saying too often I see the people upset that what they really want to sell is really some kind of an incited society, one that is ripped to pieces with good guys and bad guys and an internal conflict and people who want to steal from you and cheat you and rape you and kill you, you know. So when this kind of narrative is being open, then then you feel that, you know, that, let's say, as a part of a country, we should elect a new presenter. You know, everything will still suck, but that when we look at this guy, we will not feel embarrassed and ashamed.
Chegou uma pergunta interessante do público que eu vou fazer uma pequena modulação.
There is a question very interesting from the audience. I will modulate it in the progressive wings of political parties. You had intellectual parties and humor people, anti-labor party, petistas, PT is the name, Party of Labor. So do you think that for a progressive writer, it's easier to have humor in a context of authoritarian governments as nowadays or not?
Well, I think that, first of all, it depends what kind of humor you use. I think that I use Jewish humor, and Jewish humor is always reflexive. You know, we Jews, we are too stingy to waste a joke on a stranger. We will only make fun of those we love. So I think that when I write about the difficulties of life and the ways that we are trying to tackle them. And of course, living in a country where I have a prime minister who make a point to make life difficult, I have a lot to write about. I do agree that, you know, that both humor and imagination, they arrive when you have problems in your life. You know, when I'm on a deserted island with my beautiful wife, eating a pineapple and looking at the sunset, I'm not funny. I don't have any ideas. I'm just happy. But the moment that I feel confined, then I think that through humor and through imagination, I can basically criticize the reality I live in, kind of open some kind of an imaginary door or window, and see through it something that is different from the reality that I have to deal with. And it's a way to offer an alternative.
Gregório.
Gregório, please. I believe that in Brazil, you have some particularity. The president gives a lot of joke material for free. So sometimes I say, is the golden time of humorism. You can see he is funny himself. I think it's much more difficult to really get a laugh when the reality is already funny. We have a president that makes a joke all the time. It's terrible jokes. If you like Bolsonaro, it's because of his humor. It's like Trump. They are like funny candidates, and they got a lot of audiences making fun of the situations, and it worked and has been working for many people. And for humoristic as I am, I have to compete with the reality and with the president. And I think that the humor people understand their language and they get along with it. The journalists, the opinion writer, they say how tragic the life is. I believe that. For his writer, it doesn't matter. They are not shocked. You are not going to say they elected because they wanted to have this type of president. The humor is the places where we can go and beat him in the way that can hurt him. So you can have audience, his audience. Humor in this sense is very, very necessary. It's effective guns in this new class of politicians. Funny, let's put in quotes. And you have Trump and Bolsonaro. You have Trumpism, that Bolsonaro is better to have this ethos of the clown. And you can have only arguments. You need jokes for that reason.
I totally agree with Gregório because I think that the reason the Jews always had sense of humor, because humor was always the weapon of the weak. There is an old Jewish joke that they say that a Cossack walks in front of a Jew in a very, very narrow street, and one of them has to step off the street and stand in the mud so the other will pass. So the Cossack said, I will never stop and stand in the mud for a stupid, ugly person. And the Jew says, that's strange because I always do. And he steps into the mud. So I think in the end, the Cossack will get home with clean trousers while the Jew will get on with dirty trousers. But by having humor, he can save some of his dignity. And I really feel that when we deal with leaders like Bolsonaro, Netanyahu, or Trump, then basically when we use this humor, it's not that it's so super effective to destroy those people as it is super essential for us to keep ourselves together, to find some hope in ourselves, to feel that we are not caving in these difficult times.
Perfeito, queria emendar com uma piada que não é de...
Perfect. I have a joke that is not Jewish joke, but is the scent of the patron scent of human writers. I don't remember his name. I think it's Saint Christopher. I think it's Saint Christopher, the patron of the barbecue people as well, because he died in a grill. It's Saint Lawrence. He was grilled. And when he was grilled, he was there in the grill, dying. He screamed. He said, okay, can you turn on the other day? Because this is good enough. It's already well done. And he became this patron center of the human writers and the barbecue people to St. Lawrence. I think the Jewish joke goes, yeah, he couldn't avoid being grilled, burnt, but guaranteed this dignity to be the other side burnt too. That is the way. It doesn't matter. It's not the purpose of convincing people, but you know, in your history, in your program, you only have converted people. You know, people that understand you, but the converted need someone to talk to them. Doesn't matter. The humor is not. As a gum that you put a bullet that you put a gun, but it's your food if you are in the trench. The human and poem is to feed people at the darkness of the trench. They had such a terrible time, and now they are in the darkness and they can read the book, so in the following day they can go and fight for in the war. I think art is not munition, but is feeding for the spirit of these people that are in the war.
Yeah, if I can continue Gregorio's metaphor, I would say that I think that humor is less a weapon and more a bandage, in which, in times in which we are being attacked and hurt, we can at least treat ourselves and get better by using it.
Olha, eu teria muitas outras perguntas para fazer para vocês
I
dois.
would have such many questions to be sharing with you. I would love to be in a bar, drinking together, and to talk about so many subjects. But this moment that you talked about, a human who was so perfect in this theme of this table, I think you have the obligation, a moral obligation, to end up with your beautiful performance and Etgar saying as a band-aid or a cure. And you have the best Jewish joke that I had in my life. And Gregório said so. I will not resist. Gregório had a good joke of a Jewish that I thought it was a competitive one. When you have in the house of the people, Casa do Povo, the census goes to the door, knocks at the door, and they have a census persons. Do you think that Rabinovich lives here? No, what's your name? It's Abraham Rabinovich. But you said that you don't live here. You say, this is life all about?
So I have another Jewish joke.
Hã? Perdão, não ouvi.
So the joke is that, you know, as you said, like, you know, I don't know, a Christian, a Muslim, and a Jew, they meet and they argue who has the best God. So the Christian says, you know, I was in the middle of a desert and I was about to die, and I said, God, please save me. So suddenly all the place around me is a desert, but just above me there is rain, and I drank the rain and I survived. And then the Muslim guy say, oh, you think this is something? I was in a ship in a storm, and you know, and I prayed to Allah, and suddenly all the sea is storm, but just around my ship it's just like a paddle. So the Jew says, you think that's something? You know, I'm going on Shabbat on Saturday, and I find a briefcase full of US dollars, you know, and I can't take the briefcase because it's Shabbat. And then I look around me, and all of Rio de Janeiro is Shabbat, but just around me it's Tuesday.
Muito bom, maravilhoso.
Bom, hoje é sábado.
Então, today is Saturday.
But around me it's Tuesday.
Mas
muito obrigado, Etgar e Gregório.
Thank you very much, Etgar and Gregório. It was fantastic. It was a great pleasure to be with you. We hope you have the opportunity to be in a bar, and
I feel the same.
Until there, okay, be at home with health, you and your families and everybody that is with us. Thank you very much. See you soon.
Thank you.
Next time.
Gracias. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom.
Shalom, shalom. Bom
Bye
Shabbat.
bye.